Hello, everyone, and welcome all to our evening event on global asset management and stewardship. Tonight's webinar is brought to you by the Center for Ethics and Law at UCL, and my name is Iris Chu. I'm director of the center. Together with me are a panel of speakers who are very experienced in the asset management industry. We have with us Elisa Chenchik, Senior ESG Policy Advisor at Norges Bank Investment Management. Elisa is responsible for the fund's engagement with international organizations, standard setters, and policymakers on sustainability, responsible investment, and corporate governance. And prior to that, Elisa was with the UK Financial Conduct Authority. Our second speaker is Michael Heskovich, Global Head of Asset Management at BNP Paribas. Michael is the Global Head of Stewardship within the Sustainability Center at BNP Paribas Asset Management since 2008. He's in charge of the elaboration and implementation of the stewardship policy, including voting and engagement, and he plays a critical role in the design, development, and the implementation of BNP Paribas Asset Management's global sustainability strategy. So we have two very eminent and experienced asset managers on our panel today. And together co-chairing with me today is also Francisco de la Pena, who is Associate Lecturer at UCL and a member of the advisory panel of the center. Tonight's proceedings are structured as follows. Francisco and I will act as alternating chairs in order to pose 3 sets of themed questions to our panel of speakers. Our 3 sets of themed questions are based on the following themes. The first broad theme is regarding our panelists' views of what purpose stewardship codes serve and what sort of policy orientations they reflect and their influence. The second set of themed questions revolves around the achievements of the practice of stewardship. And the third set of themed questions will be more forward-looking in nature in terms of what our panelists think are the challenges for stewardship in today's landscape for asset management, especially in these times of global uncertainty and instability. So we encourage our members of the audience to submit any questions via the Q&A function during our discussion of these sets of themed questions as you see as relevant to your interest, because we would like to pose these questions to our panel of speakers during the sections where we are asking these theme questions. So please do keep the questions flowing, and we hope that you'll be engaged with this more interactive format and will enjoy it. So without further ado, let's start with our first set of theme questions regarding stewardship codes, policy, and influence. And I'll be posing these questions to both our speakers who will take turns in answering or giving their perspectives on them. The first very broad question to both Elisa and Michael is this. How do you think global stewardship codes shape the practice of asset management? Do you see these global stewardship codes as infusing public interest concerns? And do you think asset management is gaining a wider economic and social footprint as well as orientation? How important do you think are these broader concerns to asset management? Over to you, Elisa.
Thank you very much, Iris, and great to be on this panel with you all today. So we are a founding member of PRI, the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, which can be considered in a sense the original stewardship code. But we all know that stewardship codes, more strictly speaking, emerged after the global financial crisis, with the first one being, in the UK in 2010, largely driven by the Royal Bank of Scotland case, and also growing recognition of the importance of investor engagement and shareholders holding boards and companies to account. We've definitely seen since then the growth in the number of stewardship codes. I think there's around 20 worldwide at the moment, the last one being published in Switzerland just about a month ago. And more recently, I would agree that we observe a tendency towards a growing recognition of the importance of ESG for sustainable value creation. This is something that Norges Bank Investment Management has been convinced about for a long time. We are a long-term asset owner. We invest for the future wealth of future generations of Norwegians. But this is being increasingly reflected in stewardship codes. The UK code, for example, having a specific Principle 7 on ESG integration. I would also say that there is definitely a growing recognition and accordingly also growing expectations on investor stewardship when it comes to wider non-financial issues, environmental and social issues and public interest concerns, broadly speaking. Again, this is nothing new for MBIM. We've long been an active owner because of our long-term horizon and also our belief that our returns over time are dependent on sustainable developments. And that's not just in economic terms, but also in environmental and social terms. We are essentially a universal owner, so we depend on a sustainable economy to preserve wealth for future generations. When it comes to codes and stewardship expectations, I would also say there is more focus on public interest in terms of systemic risk. So moving away from a single focus on issuer-specific engagement and idiosyncratic risk. And for instance, I believe that the ICGN, the International Corporate Governance Network, will revise its global stewardship principles next year and potentially add one on systemic stewardship and policy engagement on issues such as protection of minority shareholders. So you've got that angle as well. And actually, when it comes to us and our work, we really see our standard setting engagement, which I lead, as closely linked to systemic stewardship. So we're trying to drive better outcomes for all companies and to help well-functioning markets. So we've been doing this for a long time, but it is fair to say that expectations on stewardship and public interest concerns and drivers of this have been growing in the last few years.
Thank you, Elisa. Would like to hear Michael's perspective on this.
Sure, thanks. Thanks first for inviting and the possibility to speak on this subject that I've loved, that I've been working on for the last 15 years. So happy to have those discussions. I'm glad that Elisa mentioned ICGN as well, because I'm sitting on the ICGN board. So it's good that you were the first mentioning the ICGN, as I'm going to be conflicting there. But no, I think that to complement what Elisa was saying, I guess what has been, I mean, for BNP Paribas Asset Management, the stewardship code has not been driving a lot of change because we were already doing a lot of things in advance. I think that there's been big push for a lot of actors that were not doing a lot or that were more smaller asset manager or asset owner as well, that we desensitized from stewardship code, from regulation, whatever form it took, depending on the country. It put a lot of those actors into a position to really develop something that they were not necessarily doing. And that's what's interesting. Elisa mentioned on the evolution of sustainability that were not initially necessarily part of the different regulations / stewardship code, where initially the focus was a lot on voting, then focus on engagement, on other stuff, by the way, that the stewardship has some dimensions that are different depending on and the word is a bit different. If you're UK, it includes overall your approach as well on ESG integration, while it's you more on the voting engagement front in other markets. But what the commonality between all of that, and why there have been so many codes also around the word, especially in Asia, in my view, was the realization that if you want to have an evolution from investor, local asset manager, local asset owner, for them to be more involved on stewardship, on voting, on engagement, the stewardship code has been really a positive movement, really to put in place a structure that will imply for asset manager, for asset owner to construct or to develop a policy and approach that might have not been taken before. So I think that the influence has been important and it's still work in progress in a lot of markets, especially from actors, and PRI and other organizations have helped on that front to really able to structure an approach toward those important questions. And we'll speak more of that, but it's and with evolution of saying it's not only voting, it's not only corporate engagement, it's public policy engagement and other stuff that are also in that perspective and as part of the evolution of the different also approach and stewardship code.
Thank you, Michael. I think from what the both of you have said, it appears to me that you feel that stewardship norms have already been developing by the industry, and in a way, you are not just takers of stewardship codes, articulations and norms, but rather, you have also been shaping, and perhaps the consolidation of these norms is a reflection of what the industry is already developing. I mean, do you agree that is the case? To what extent do you see yourself as takers of these codes norms, and to what extent do you see yourself as shapers? Michael?
Sure, I was not sure if I was. Well, I mean, I think that it's a fair, it's an interesting question, and I guess, I mean, we define, I mean, with the same spirit that you described, that we consider that we are a future maker in our approach and our philosophy, and I think it's not because it's a commercial approach that I'm saying that. I think it's a really belief of what you can do and what's your responsibility or what you want to achieve. And this is, I think, quite different to some of other actors. I'm not sure we disagree with Elisa on the approach for both our firm, but still, I think that there is a big difference towards some other actors that do not view themselves as future maker, as influential in that way. There might be, based on some also conversation in some markets, such as the US seems to be also a bit more conservative from some actors regarding especially this question. But for us, it's clearly key that we should go behind just voting, corporate engagement, our scope, and public policy engagement with governments, shaping stewardship code, shaping the regulation is part of, I think, of our important role, and that's what we do, and that we clearly claim that part of the objective and outcome of what we want to achieve, and it's important to do that. I think it's not unanimous by all actors, but I think that some actors are clearly playing and having this approach.
Thank you, Michael. Over to you, Elisa.
Thank you. Yeah, so I definitely would say shapers. Takers, strictly speaking, I do have to clarify that we are not a signatory of national stewardship codes, although we have engaged with some of them, and we will engage definitely with ICGN as it comes to the revision of the global stewardship principles next year. We are not a signatory for a couple of reasons. It's because we manage a globally diversified investment portfolio across numerous markets and jurisdictions. There's around 70 of them at the moment. Our mandate and approach are shaped by the Norwegian government and also by their broader policy objectives and also ethical guidelines. And the stewardship codes can be often specific to particular concerns or region. We do need a consistent approach across different markets, which is tailored to our position, including as a sovereign wealth fund. So we have, in a way, developed our own comprehensive framework on responsible investment, and we've been publishing a comprehensive responsible investment report for a long time. And this is tailored to our expectations, position papers, and active ownership. However, despite not being a signatory, strictly speaking, to certain codes, our active ownership work is completely aligned with all the common principles which are central to many stewardship codes when it comes to transparency, accountability, and long-term value creation. And another thing I wanted to mention is that I do think, while stewardship codes most fundamentally apply to investors, whether it's asset managers or asset owners, with companies as issuers not being themselves signatories, but obviously, having corporate governance codes on that side, I do think that issuers do have a role to play when it comes to making stewardship more effective, particularly when it comes to cooperating in good faith with investors throughout the engagement process, providing access to investors in the first place, which can be an issue in some markets where the traditional stewardship and investor engagement is weaker. But also generally by respecting shareholder rights. And also you have the other issue, which is, beyond access, which is just transparent and comprehensive communication by the issuer again, as well as by investors, is a necessary aspect of constructive stewardship. We do see there, for example, some challenges in terms of weaker practices of, for example, English disclosures in some markets, such as Japan. That can be a challenge from a stewardship perspective.
Thank you, Elisa. I'm picking up some of these gaps that you have mentioned, and I'm very interested in it. But before we get to, whether you want stewardship codes to address any particular issues that you don't see being captured in current codes, one question that I have for the both of you is, would you be able to share in terms of how you engage with policymakers in shaping stewardship codes, especially if you feel that you're subject to those norms, or if you feel that those are particularly important to your investment interests? Elisa?
Yes, of course. So as I mentioned, we categorize our work in responsible investment across 3 pillars: market level, company level, and portfolio level. So when it comes to the market level, beyond things such as academic research, the key pillar is really engagement with standard setters and regulators, and that's what I do in my daily job. So we engage with regulators and standard setters worldwide on a range of issues. Big focus areas have been corporate governance principles and codes, but also stewardship codes, and I expect that might be increasing over time, and also corporate sustainability reporting. So we have open channels of communications with whoever the holder of the stewardship code might be in many markets, and we try to shape that from our perspective. And we're also trying to be as transparent as we can. We have an ambition to be the most transparent fund in the world, actually, when it comes to disclosing our own stewardship activities and processes and expectations.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say something quite different to Elisa. So maybe just elaborating something, which is, I mean, organization like us, BNP Paribas Asset Management, we're a worldwide asset manager. We have some presence in a lot of markets where we have local stewardship code. And I think so. Just to illustrate, I think that the engagement that we're doing with also public policies to make sure also to recognize that we should find the right balance between, of course, there are a lot of importance of local code, but I mean, contrary to Elisa, so we're signature of some of those local code, not all of them. We're not signature of 21 local code. We're part of being endorsed, having endorsed the ICGN stewardship code, the UK stewardship code, and other local one. But I think that it's also important to recognize the fact that international actors hopefully could be able to report, like Elisa said, to a global reporting, and not to go into a lot of constraints that can be coming from local code. So that's maybe more as a perspective, because the reality is quite often, except maybe for the UK one, there are not strong expectations from our clients necessarily that you follow local code and you can buy that you can explain that you're following in spirit those local code and having this approach. But I just want to mention that because I think that there is this tendency potentially from regulation that everyone wants to have their approach, their code. At the end, there are small differences in spirit. It's almost the same when you're in an international actors. Hopefully you don't have to sign on all local code, but because otherwise you could create a lot of difficulty and constraint from reporting purposes, especially if there are some reporting, specific requirement reporting or on that aspect. But other than that, I mean, like Elisa, I think it's part of the public policy is also part of the strategy, part of one of our 2 pillar as well. So nothing quite different to what Elisa has mentioned on the philosophy and approach on this question.
Right, thank you very much, Michael. As Elisa mentioned just now about certain useful things that might help stewardship, like access to a company's information, for example. I'm just wondering whether or not you have any thoughts about any particular gaps in stewardship codes or stewardship policy that you think actually should be standardized, perhaps across many different, stewardship codes, many different local codes, so that that sort of standardization becomes more globalized and becomes a norm for the practice of stewardship, but also assists in the practice of stewardship. Do you see any particular gaps that you think ought to be addressed? Michael?
I think that there have been clearly gaps in the past, such as the one that Elisa explained in the introduction, where, for example, the UK Stewardship Code initially was not really targeting a lot of sustainability or not at all. That was addressed. I think that there are sometimes, I would say it's a case by case, and this is where potentially local markets can be really relevant, because I think that there are common ground on what the expectation on stewardship that are part already of the ICGN. I mean, we revise every year every couple of years, and we'll do it, as Elisa mentioned, to make sure that we capture any last development. But from a worldwide perspective, I think that that there is not big miss in my view. Maybe Elisa had a good idea there, but I'm not seeing a big gap. However, I think that there are sometimes important gaps that are not necessarily addressed, especially on some local code. And let me give you a concrete example of what I have in mind here. For example, you had some markets where there have been a huge emphasis on making sure investors have an approach on voting, that they vote on proxy, etc. That all makes sense. But at the same time, the local market, or the reality, is that it's a market that still does not allow easily to vote by proxy, or it's really costly, or the realities that AGM are still happening with show of hands, and there is no real impact as an institutional investor if you're just voting by proxy, because it means that at the end what will really count is people in the room that will show their hands. That's the reality of lots of general meetings around the world and a lot of markets that sometimes are happening. And that's one example where you're considering from the stewardship code to address a global approach and copy and paste what great practices mean, and having investors voting at AGM, which totally makes sense. But on the other way around, if you're not fixing some issues like those, well, you're not addressing, I think, one of the big constraints or issues. So, and I have lots of them in mind, but I think that we should not, we should be careful to what not every market is similar, and not every market is at the same level of practice. And sometimes there are some basic rules that sometimes are not backed by the stewardship code, by the way, by the law, by other regimes, that need to be addressed first before really, in order to really have an effective stewardship approach on those markets.
Thank you. Elisa?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, some of this may be less kind of attention grabbing or exciting issues, which are linked to the actual proxy voting process, and investor rights can be very important as well, and have a really, really huge impact on the practice of stewardship. Although there's a lot less attention being paid to them, issues such as vote confirmation, disclosure of documents, and the timing of those ahead of AGM. So again, maybe like less sexy issues, but equally important for investors. In terms of gaps, again, given the diversity of markets that we invest in, a key challenge that I would say exists is the lack of global consistency in stewardship standards, which is why the ICGN plays such an important role. For example, the UK Stewardship Code is quite detailed. It focuses on a range of issues, has a strong drive towards the outcomes reporting as well. Japan's Stewardship Code has a strong emphasis on shareholder engagement. And obviously, you still have a majority of markets which don't have a code. ESG has been integrated overall in stewardship codes, but sometimes maybe clear guidelines on how to effectively integrate ESG into investment and engagement can be helpful. But again, I think we need to be careful about not mandating, one single way of integrating ESG into investments. Stewardship codes need to be flexible as well to adapt to a range of investment styles, horizons, and objectives. And they can, codes can also be vague or a bit unclear, can lead to varied interpretations and implementations. But there is also a potential for box ticking and, compliance focused mindset. And we've seen the debate about the Talcon report here in the UK. So it's, there is a little bit of a risk of engagement in the search of KPIs. And another thing that we are really careful about is reporting on outcomes or individual companies' engagement. So we at Anbim are quite cautious about causality. And I fear sometimes that the expectations on outcomes reporting can incentivize a bias towards easy wins in changing companies' behavior, or companies themselves might become less open to engagement if the objectives and the outcomes are to be made fully public. So it's I think it's a tricky line to be found in between avoiding boilerplate reporting, which only focuses on processes and policies being there, and going in a way too far on the outcomes of any engagement.
Right, thank you very much. Yes, I think regulators and stock exchanges, those who issue the codes, always have to find that delicate balance. And I think maybe that brings me neatly to my final question of this section, which is on the UK Stewardship Code. The UK Stewardship Code underwent reform in 2020. And even before that, I mean, it was the pioneering Stewardship Code in 2012, and there has been some research by Keteluzu and Seams showing that the UK code has inspired a wave of diffusion across, many markets. And so it underwent reform in 2020 and took on a very, very different look from the previous one. In your view, do you think that there are significant improvements or otherwise in this strategic change that the FRC took? I mean, what might be attractive, you think, to an asset manager in the UK Stewardship Code in terms of norm setting? Shall I come back to Elisa and then Michael?
Sure. So I think one thing that's been positive in the revision is the kind of move from perhaps like a stronger focus on issuer-specific engagement to a wider approach to what's considered stewardship. So I think, again, that provides for flexibility and for a range of activities and that investors can take in exercising stewardship, and that includes the public policy side as well. That we've kind of touched upon a little bit. Linked to that, also broadening the scope of stewardship in terms of applying not just to equities, but also to other asset classes, in recognizing that there will be differences across, again, listed equities, fixed income, private equity, so on and so forth. And I think other positives are the stronger emphasis on long-term value creation, which is very much aligned with our investment belief. So we see that as a positive, but it's a bit hard to say whether these changes, I think, have made a difference in the effectiveness of stewardship for UK assets. Right,
thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I will not repeat what I actually agree with Elisa's point. I guess I think that from a positive side, I agree. From I would say the more negative or side, if I'm commenting a little bit and coming as well to the point just before from Elisa on the outcome point, example, etc., which has been an emphasized a lot. I think I agree. We need to find the right balance. We need to, on the 2 points. So the outcome-driven results, I think, make sense, but should be balanced toward the risk of, if you're only looking at an outcome quantitative approach, which is more and more really the tendency of some of our clients, to be honest, as asset managers, that are only interested is, okay, well, what did you achieve? Can you prove your results, etc. Of course, it creates for us the pressure to be more transparent what we do and why we do it, which is a positive side. On the negative side, the risk is for me, if you're really interested only at every time of measuring an outcome, etc. There are easy ways to do it. Okay, we send a letter, we have some questions, we ask company to answer those questions, we can track it. and we can report, yes, we've been positive, company X company has answered, S company has said that, etc. Which is a bit a tendency, to be frank, today on what we've seen market doing, which is in a way really not an effective engagement. And if you speak to corporate, they're receiving more and more questionnaire from their asset manager, asset owner. And I think it's one of the reasons also being driven only by outcome ability to report. It will create that, and which in a way is not really is not going to be really effective in my view. The other challenge that we're facing, and hopefully on the future revision of the UK Stewardship Code, we will be a bit less focused on that, or be more flexible, is I think the increase of the volume of the reports that were required for asset manager, asset owner to comply with the UK Stewardship Code. And it's something that I've mentioned directly to the FRC and other, where I'll give you a concrete example, is they are expecting one unique document that will be able to prove that you can be signature of the UK Stewardship Code, which in practice for us would have meant that we had to repeat a lot of things on the policy. So the exact opposite effect of what Elisa explained, which was intention, I think, to be more less toward policy, more toward example. But the reality has been that because the expectation has been really high on a lot of elements on process as well, at the end it creates a document that, to be honest, from a user perspective, it's horrible to read those documents. And quite some of our peers have even decided to put like a separate document of compliance to make sure that they comply with all the requirements. So again, I mean, to conclude, and sorry I'm a little bit long, but I think that we need to find the right balance on all of that, because of course the movement to be able to give more transparency, of course, makes sense, but we've seen already, I think, some negative effects of what does it mean, and if it's only at the end a box ticking or low quality engagement that is a result of it, or requiring a lot of transparency and more transparency with a purpose that an impact that will be limited. I think that it's not going to be a positive overall outcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. I hope that if we have the FRC in our audience, that will be really useful in terms of hearing some of this feedback from the asset management industry itself. I think at this point, I would like to encourage members of the audience, if you have any thoughts about some of our questions on the Stewardship Code, and you would like our panelists to comment on aspects that you might be interested in, please feel free to send in your comments or your questions through the Q&A function. I'll now hand over to Francisco, my co-chair, who will be asking the panelists a set of questions on the achievements of stewardship or otherwise. Francisco.
Thank you, Iris. Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of this second set of questions is deeper, a bit deeper in some of the concepts, some of the ideas that you've been highlighting, and discuss achievements, and also, look at this new concept of what is called ESG stewardship. I think it would be interesting to discuss that a bit. So the first question is effectively, if we know that in the wake of the global financial crisis, all these stewardship codes started to proliferate, and I think the objective was to incentivize passive institutional investors to become, actively engaged shareholder stewards in the interest of, I think, precisely preventing another crisis. So that was back 15 years ago. 15 years on, what we have seen, particularly, I think the UK code is a very good example. We have seen that, some of these codes have been promoted as a mechanism to sort of save the planet, by incentivizing those investors to sort of put pressure on listed companies to focus on ESG. So the first question is, Michael, and I would like to address it first to you, is stewardship a powerful tool to manage ESG? And could we actually rely on stewardship to perhaps address some political positions in this, age of geopolitical instability?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, and not an easy one to start with this discussion, but we'll try to answer. I think that definitely, I mean, clearly, I mean, we explained on the introduction the emphasis on sustainability and vision towards both stewardship and some regulation, especially in Europe, has been there to consider that part of the solution for to solve the climate crisis is also on the accountability and responsibility from investors to take those into account. I think it has been important change if we look 10 years ago compared to now on what has been the scope of the activity of investors on that ground, meaning that if you consider engagement, voting, I'm not taking about even public policy, but we can include that. Well, 10 years ago, it was mainly voting, a bit corporate engagement, mainly focused on governance issues. Environmental was starting, but really low, etc. I guess now every actor will say that it's almost equal, or at least the sustainability ground has been a huge focus. If you look at collective engagement, Climate Action 100 Plus was launched 6 years ago, as a collective engagement initiative, now focused recently on nature action with biodiversity and multiple. I mean, I'm not going to name all of them, but clearly, I mean, the emphasis has been pushed a lot by code and practice to include sustainability because, and that's where maybe because especially with the current environment in position like in the US, where maybe it's debatable for the moment, but in our view, I think that it's coming back to, okay, well, it's fiduciary duty as an asset manager. It's a part of our fiduciary duty to take into account those. It will affect, it's affecting it. It will affect the long-term performance overall of the company, of our portfolio. So it needs to be included. So whatever you call it, you might not be able to call it anymore ESG in the US, and you need to call it differently. But I think it's not changing, in our view, the importance of having that be the risk. However, I think we need to draw the limit, I guess, saying that as an investor, if we include environmental, social dimension on our approach, and for example, if we will support a shareholder proposal on a specific environmental or social topics, it's not for political or ideological reason. It's because we consider it makes sense. It's because we consider it will be positive for the company as an investor to push this message. So clearly, that's the limit. And I think that when there are ideological questions that are raised through AGM and shareholder proposals that doesn't make sense at all from the investor community, you can clearly see that from the results of those topics. And if they make sense, they will be supported. So you always need to I mean, for us, there is all the political discussion, but what really will make sense is, does it make sense? Is this subject proposal make sense for the company, for us as an investor? And if it will, that's the case where we'll support those kind of proposals.
Thank you, Michael. Elisa, let me rephrase a bit the question. I mean, do you see stewardship as the use of your influence as an institutional investor to maximize long-term value, including the value of those ESG assets? And also, how do you integrate stewardship into the sort of investment process, not just pre-investment when you do the due diligence? I guess the stewardship can be a complement to DD, but also post-investment, like sort of incorporating engagement insights into the ESG strategy that you've got for the integration of both. The integration of that new asset into the portfolio.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as you rightly say, ESG for us is about long-term value creation. Sorry, stewardship is about long-term value creation, and it's always been like that. And that we've seen this kind of growing recognition in the codes over time and in the practice of stewardship, that stewardship is not just about corporate accountability and governance, but it's increasingly about E and S. And we do think that stewardship can be a powerful mechanism for ESG engagement, but it's definitely also a tool that one has to be very patient with. So, for example, this year we voted against the re-election of the chair at Microsoft and JP Morgan because we don't think that CEO and chair should be the same person. We failed in our vote, but our actions continue to be in line with what we think is best for board accountability. But then, you know, we also have positive examples. So, for example, we filed shareholder proposals also this year requesting for high-emitting companies in the US to set reduction targets in line with our climate change expectations. And we did see positive change. So we believe that this tool can be effective, but it's also, you know, it's important to recognize it can be quite resource intensive and it's hard to scale up, especially when you hold 9,000 companies in your portfolio. And there are also, of course, obstacles to things like filing shareholder proposals in many jurisdictions, such as very high minimum ownership rights. And I think on the, you know, so investors have definitely a role to play when it comes to ESG and stewardship, but I also think we need to be aware of the limitations again. So a lot of what we're trying to solve, especially when it comes to drivers of systemic risk, clearest example probably being climate change, a lot of these issues are linked to externalities and massive coordination failure. So we cannot solely rely on investors to solve these challenges, which is very different from saying that investors don't have a role to play. But you know, you need coordinating efforts from a varied set of stakeholders and public policy in the first place. And on your other questions, Francisco, on integration, definitely. So stewardship, when it comes to stewardship, our governance and stewardship specialists who do kind of let's say ESG specific company engagement, they work really closely with our portfolio managers, and we also have a process and a framework for ESG risk monitoring and also ESG divestments, which we're transparent and we report on.
Excellent. That's most helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. So the following question is about, shareholder engagement and corporate transparency. Michael, can I ask you, is there sufficient of it? Is there sufficient shareholder engagement? Is there sufficient corporate transparency around stewardship in relation to ESG issues, particularly in the light of, you know, the European Union Sustainable Finance Disclosure Directive is a regulation. And also equivalent proposals elsewhere in the world, pushing for, you know, more disclosure requirements about sustainable investment products. Do we have enough of it, or what is your take on this?
Sure. I will say, if I have to sum up quickly, I would say it's better than before, but we're still not there yet. If I have to summarize overall the feeling on this. I mean, I think that there are important texts that will come up, and hopefully this will even get better with especially the CSRD, Corporate Sustainable Responsible Directive in Europe, that will start making regulation for EU company with more points in the coming years. I think that we are still in a stage. I mean, if we look, of course, I mean, if we look Europe versus rest of the world, we can clearly see more advanced transparency from European company overall. I will not surprised by saying that, but for a lot of reasons, but clearly seeing more. But I'm still really surprised. It will give you again concrete example. Climate consideration has been clearly part of the top of the agenda for a long time now. We are still struggling to get good transparency on GHG emission at a worldwide level. And we're talking about metrics that is not new, that is not something that has come up. And even if I'm not extending to the scope 3, which is, we know, more complex to calculate at the corporate level, we are still facing a lot of companies that we're having challenge to get their GHG emission on their scope 1 and 2. almost none in Europe because it's part of the regulation and all practices, but still quite relevant in markets such as the US or key markets in Asia. And I'm not even opening the debate toward other metrics that are such as on biodiversity, such as on water and forest, to give examples that are clearly even with less transparency. So I think that it's progressing. We're still facing a lot of challenge still on a lot of data to get access to. We are still facing a lot of challenge to make sure that we have an international framework or a framework that will mean that we can really compare all. So I think that all the initiatives that are at settle level that are ongoing, or initiatives such as CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, to have international framework of reporting is something that we push really hard to make sure that we won't have issue. But the reality, I mean, to finalize it, we're still struggling a lot on the data yet, still on those especially on environmental and social aspects.
Thank you, Michael. Elisa, at Norges, I mean, what are your thoughts on these? And also, are you able to give us a little bit of color about, you know, what is the sort of information that you are looking to obtain? And also, what is the information that you make publicly available? I mean, do you publicize, for instance, the policies on the way you engage with the companies you invest in? Do you publicize the strategies about the way you're going to generate all that long-term value, so the investors out there, you know, become also familiar with it? If you can tell us a bit about this, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with, what kind of information we need from our portfolio companies, which again, we see very similar challenges from what Michael just said. So obviously we use a variety of sources, on the financial side, you have annual reports, you have regulatory filings, but on the sustainability ESG front, there's a lot less. So the kind of variability and also voluntary nature of reporting standards across different markets has been a challenge for us for a number of years, which is why we've very much prioritized, again, for quite some time, the issue of corporate sustainability reporting. So it's a topic that is quite close to my heart and I'm working on quite a lot these days. So we are, for example, a vice chair of the International Sustainability Standards Board Investor Advisory Group, which used to be the Investor Advisory Group of SASB, which, as some of you might know, has been merged into ISSB. So we're doing quite a lot to try and support the regulatory adoption of ISSB standards across the globe. We're hopeful that it can provide this global baseline for sustainability reporting, but we are really far from that in practice. CSRD obviously has been a great effort and a great development in the EU. And we also see the relevance of the double materiality approach because, again, we are a long-term investor. We think that boards should be accountable for outcomes as well. And also some of these outcomes might become financially material over time, especially when you adopt a long time frame as we do in terms of investment horizon. But there's a long way to go. The SEC has plenty of challenges, I think it's fair to say, when it comes to finalizing its climate disclosures rule, and that's just one topic. So again, even the information on GHG emissions disclosures, as Michael mentioned, is really hard to get. And I think on the social aspects as well, social topics, human rights, good data is lacking. A lot of information is focused on controversies data and incidents. So there's a long way to go there as well. And another issue is the reliability, which is why we support assurance of sustainability reporting, recognizing that it can be challenging to achieve. It will take time. We're expecting to see a number of qualified statements probably when it comes to CSRD and its limited assurance requirements. And it will also take time before non-financial information can be subject to the same level of assurance and to reasonable assurance to the same extent as financial statements. But it is a good starting point, and we think it's helpful in driving the importance of sustainability reporting really up to the CFO and to the board level. And in terms of the policies and strategies, again, we are very transparent in what we expect of companies. So we have a set of 10 expectations documents at the moment. They range across environmental and social issues. We started in the 2000s with children's rights and climate change, but we've actually revised our expectations on climate change recently just published a few months ago in September. And one of the things that we've changed beyond the general, much more focus on transition planning elements is actually expectation for companies to report according to ISSB and the climate standard, as opposed to TCFD reporting, which was kind of in a previous version. So we have all these expectations documents, which focus broadly across the same pillars as TCFD, so strategy, risk management, metrics and targets, and governance. And we also have a set of position papers on more traditional governance issues, such as the independence of the boards, separation of chair and CEO, or board expertise and diversity.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much both for sharing your insights on these points. Let's look at impact. I mean, Michael, can I ask you, could you share with us some examples of successful stewardship practice, and how do you rate success? What counts as success?
Thanks for the question, and I'm surprised that I'm just saying that after almost an hour, because quite often I use a lot of these words. It depends on how we count success, and it depends is quite often sometimes a wording that I quite often use when we're talking about stewardship engagement. It depends how we count on success. It depends on the topic, of course, that we are addressing, and I would be more giving some concrete example. If we consider, for example, initiatives such as collective initiatives, the way quite often they work, such as climate action, there is a benchmark, a set of expectations for company to reach out, and you're going to engage regarding those expectations. So concretely, the first indicator of climate action and one of the key expectations will be that company make a commitment to reach out net zero by 2050. So that's the first indicator of the benchmark of climate action. That's one of the part of the pillar quite often when you start engaging with company. We had some success collectively with some to have company moving on that direction individually by leading some of those examples. 2 years ago, we had a utility CLP that made such commitment to reach out net zero by 2050 and have a transition pathway accordingly. So that's going to be an example where you're setting up expectation, either an example that I gave collectively. There is an example that I gave individually that could be linked, for example, to your votes. Elisa mentioned CEO and chair split. We share the same goal on this particular topic. We have other rules on gender diversity, for example. So companies that you might have opposed in the past that engage on this particular topic, that has not a combined CEO chair role, that have a lack of diversity on their board, not in line with your expectation, you're opposing, you're engaging, and at the end you manage to get an improvement for the company, a change of practices, and a proposal that at the end is aligned with your expectation. You could say that it's a success of engagement. I think that we should be still getting to avoid having I don't know how if it's correct in English, but I would say governance washing, or what stewardship washing to make the parallel on greenwashing. We need to be humble on the fact that we know quite often that it's a combination of factors why the company is changing. It's not because you're the unique investor that is pushing for this message, because and the consequence is the company is changing. Quite maybe the company was intended to do it anyway. So I think that's where we should have the limitation of those questions, where it's not it's quite often not so straightforward that you're asking, yes, the company answer to your question, that's it, it's a success, and you can name it. It's quite often questions that are more complex, and a variety of reasons why you manage to get a success. So that's I think the limitation that we should be clear about. But that's few examples that where we try to define and try to measure the success.
Thank you, Michael. Elisa, if I can pick up on something that Michael has highlighted. I mean, how do you sort of reassure stakeholders of the authenticity of your investment approach and an investment approach that you want to sell as sustainable? And also, how can you reassure them of, the fact that the stewardship is also helping to mitigate any greenwashing claims that, whether we like it or not, they are there?
Well, first of all, by integrating sustainability and stewardship into our investment, and by being very transparent about it. And we do it in a range of formats. So it's not just our responsible investment report, which usually come out in February every year, but we're accountable to a wide range of stakeholders, and not just our owner, technically speaking, which is the Ministry of Finance in Norway, but also the Norwegian public. We have reporting to the Parliament and the very healthy public debate. We also engage a lot with civil society. We have good engagement and good dialogue with those organizations as well. On the success point, I think, again, we think about success from a long-term perspective, and we don't expect to see change overnight. So for us, constructive dialogue with companies and also consistent voting pattern which is aligned with our expectations and our positions are all steps towards success. But of course, when we see clear change, like portfolio companies moving to set net zero target, that is a clear form or sign of success for us. So a positive development we've seen is that more companies are setting targets, which again, Michael also mentioned. We track this on an ongoing basis. So it is a key indicator for the progress of our climate action plan, and also our climate change related shareholder proposals, which I touched on earlier. So now there's about, I think, 65% of our scope 1 and 2 emissions in the fund, which are covered by net zero targets. These figures are a little bit uncertain. They don't include the value chain, which can represent significant emissions. But this is a number that, to be honest, surpasses the expectations that we had just a few years ago. But that being said, success is different from causality. We are very careful about claiming that we've been behind the success. Obviously, we do engage with an outcome in mind, and we track the results of the engagement over time. But again, there's a lot of factors at play, and there's a lot of stakeholders that are pushing towards one direction or maybe away from it. But it is an ongoing journey, and also internally, we are improving our systems and our procedures to be able to really track the results of engagement more systematically, and to also further document our success. So this is a work in progress, and it will continue to be for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, both. So I think we need to wrap up with the last question. And I think that, we talk to people, our asset managers, any stakeholder, everyone would recognize, I think, that there are several pathways to take to achieve ESG goals and net zero. So, Michael, where do you see it on the debate between the divestment and engagement? Do you think that these approaches are substitutable, or they are complementary? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely for me, complementary. Also because, just in a word, BNP Paribas is a combination of both active and passive, but we are not mainly passive, and we have more, I would say, more active than passive, and we have some quant. And I think that it's quite complementary. Quite often, we are happy that we can engage, and sometimes the engagement go nowhere. And it's great that you have this strategy of saying, and also this leverage of saying to company, well, this could be the solution. If we don't manage to get the outcome that we're looking at, or quite often, especially on severe cases, why we're engaging, or climate strategy, etc. I think it's a strong argument. The example that I gave with TLT, clearly, that was part of, if we didn't have this commitment, we would have exited the company. We stay with the company because we managed to get this commitment from the company. So I think it's a quite powerful tool, and I like to have this tool to say, well, we could exclude at the end, and quite often, if we sum up, the exclusion will be a form of failure or the result of non-successful engagement at the end. On the other end, there are some circumstances where you can decide that the divestment is the approach for risk reason, or to give a concrete example of our approach, is, for example, we decided to exclude the tobacco sector because of the belief that at the end, well, what will be really the outcome that you can search from the tobacco sector that could be positive rather than just stopping tobacco. I don't know how you can do healthy tobacco. So that could be also sometimes the position and say, well, we don't think that the outcome worth it or is really possible to engagement, so we divest. But in practice, I would say I prefer to do your combination, and I think it's quite complementary approach.
Understood. Elisa, do you see eye to eye with Michael on this point? And if you felt like other people that think that, perhaps divestment is less optimal, under which circumstances do you think that, divestment could be more optimal approach, even if it would be your second choice?
Thank you. No, it's a very similar response, I would say. So we do see these strategies as complementary, but overall we believe in engaging more than divesting. And our reliance overall on engagement is also directly linked to our nature as a universal owner, especially when it comes to systemic risk, which we're not really able to divest from, even if we wanted to. So we engage to change. We view engagement as a proactive approach where we maintain our stake and work to enhance value in our investee companies. That being said, divestment can also be a powerful tool for change. It directly impacts a company's financial standing, its public image, its reputation. Yeah. When we divest, it might seem that stewardship has failed, but the divestment itself can send a message to the entire industry, also regarding our values and our expectations as an investor. And also I think it might be important to clarify that for us, the concept of divestment is twofold, or well, in practice, we have two frameworks for divestments. So one is the divestment, which is recommended by our Council on Ethics, which is an independent body set up by the Ministry of Finance, and that's really based on ethical exclusions. So the first kind, this ethical divestments, is a direction that we want to invest in companies that produce tobacco, for example, cannabis, certain types of weapons, coal, or violate fundamental ethical norms. And the way it works is that the Council of Ethics gives advice to NBIM on the exclusion of companies from the fund's portfolio. And then we have the divestment, which we make on our own account. So these are the ESG risk divestments, which we typically use for small holdings in case of unacceptable risk, and also companies that are really irresponsive to engagement. So circumstances, for example, have been persistent non-compliance with ethical guidelines, lack of responsiveness to engagement, severe environmental impacts. This can vary overall from around 20 to 70 companies a year, so it's not a huge amount compared to the 9,000 we own. And in last year, we divested mostly because of human rights violations. But so it's, I would say they both have a role to play.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, both. I think we're running tight on time, so I'm going to give the floor back to Iris to look at the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. I think we had a really great conversation on how stewardship is being practiced, and especially in terms of the links with ESG, which is a very controversial issue. But stepping away from ESG, I think my role in the last set of theme questions is to engage in a little bit more crystal ball gazing, or probably to tease out some questions that might be pressing for a lot of savers, especially pension savers, and might be rather disconcerting. The first one is regards looking into the future. What do you think would happen to the strategy of global asset management? Are we in a time where we see such geopolitical fragmentation that we think that the globalization boom, of the last 20 plus years is in reversal? And global asset management has very greatly benefited from the globalization, movement. And I'm just wondering, do you see that as a real risk to changing significantly strategies in global asset management? How do you see asset management going forward broadly in this very uncertain landscape? Michael?
Sure. Thanks a lot for this aspect. I guess it depends from where you sit. Clearly, from an economic perspective, we're probably seeing the end of globalization in the way we have seen on the last decade, and clearly we are seeing more and more fragmentation, regional approach that are happening following COVID, Ukraine war, etc. And clearly, I think that this path will continue from an economic perspective. The question for us as investors is that will there be any consequences for the subject that we discussed today on stewardship? I mean, does it mean that it will change the approach and dynamic towards some of those dimensions that we spoke for since an hour since the start? I don't know. I hope not, especially on some key. I mean, that's a big fear, but I hope that it will not clearly change especially some challenge that we have to face globally. And I mean, that's easy to say, but that's so important that, of course, I mean, if you want to solve climate crisis, biodiversity, natural loss, I mean, it's global that will be able to solve it. It's not going to be regional. So that, but we can already see that all the debate around single materiality and double materiality potentially create already a form of fragmentation or different approach depending on the jurisdiction you are. But I think that so clearly seeing a trend of overall fragmentation, hoping that on those important challenges that we have to face, especially the one that I've described, that we manage to get a global response. Otherwise, we won't have any response to those challenges. But if we're going back again, I mean, on what we have seen, I mean, there are important differences on stewardship across the globe and tactics. I mean, we're speaking about the same wording, but again, to be giving concrete examples, the way engagement work at the US level, at the European level, is so different. I mean, we're talking about the same tool, but filing a shareholder proposal is more open in the US, but with advisory vote and a role of shareholders that is quite different compared to Europe. Engagement is more, I would say, complex, and you need to quite often to escalate more in the US compared to Europe. The rights are so different. So in practice, I think that we're talking about similar wording and question, but the reality is as of today already the tactics are and the approach are in fact different depending on the market. So the fragmentation in a way is already there, even if there have been conversions over the last decade.
Thank you, Michael. I realize that it's a bit unfair to ask Michael about the full range of what he thinks the reversal of globalization has on asset management in general. I wouldn't mind if Alyssa wants to comment more broadly on this beyond what you think, how you think stewardship practices would be affected. Over to you, Alyssa.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a big question indeed, but definitely it's impossible to negate a reversal in the globalization trend, that this clearly has an impact on us and, any other investor. Geopolitical fragmentation can impact global markets. You have market volatility, challenges in cross-border investments, disruptions in supply chains, trade wars. So as a global asset manager, we monitor these developments carefully. So, for example, we assess the risk exposure of the portfolio to various scenarios from a geopolitical perspective, and we try to ensure a diversified investment approach to mitigate potential risks. But we're essentially investing in the world economy, so it's really hard for us to divest from any of this risk again. And you also have the fragmentation when it comes to regulatory environments, which is again, not strictly speaking related to geopolitics per se, or things like energy security or trade wars, but it's definitely an issue. So we see convergence. We've seen convergence in sustainability reporting, as we discussed some minutes ago. But I do think, there will be challenges over time, and there probably will be increasing when it comes to stewardship practice as well, because of this, and whether it's rising nationalism or less openness to global investors and global trade. We also see some tendency towards perhaps restricting foreign direct investment, and that whole has an impact for our stewardship activities. So in terms of what we do, we try to have even more focus on resilience and adaptability of our investment strategies, a growing emphasis on sustainability and responsible investing, and also building the in-house expertise specifically on geopolitical risks and also how global economic risks impact our investments. And that encompasses things such as data analytics.
Right, thank you, Elisa. I think the final question I have in this kind of forward-looking theme section, which I know that is relatively short, but I'm still trying to encourage our members of the audience to send in any questions, comments, if you have, throughout these proceedings. The final question I have is about whether or not stewardship is being changed by technological advancements. Despite the fact that we are getting geopolitical fragmentation and that there might be reversal of globalization, yet there is, in the opposite, a trend of increasing connectivity by technological advancements across the globe. So that continues to move on in a sort of relentless pace. Do you think these technological advancements, especially some people are talking about the use of blockchains, for example, to flatten the investment chain and to encourage more direct beneficiary participation in voting or in corporate governance engagement, for example. Do you think that these will become real? And do you think that the practice of stewardship will be significantly changed by these? Any views, any thoughts? Michael?
Sure. So, there are clearly, hopefully, some technology evolutions that will have important impact. And to be honest, there are some that we're still waiting on, especially on the voting chain. The blockchain technology has been mentioned for a long time ago, and we are still not seeing really for the moment, important evolution to be quite direct, in my view, on what does it mean. And there are still lot of practices that are old age, and again, taking the example of show of hands, taking the example of you're still having to have representatives sometimes at AGM, you're still not in a lot of markets at the moment where you have even just the current technology in place just to make sure that everything is virtual or done by electronical means. On the other way around, coming to the virtual, I think that we need to find the right balance, because the COVID situation has really accelerated some aspects, such as, for everyone, remote working, for engagement and general meeting, the possibility to assist virtually, to be able to engage with technology more easily than in the past. But on the other way around, we should be careful towards not moving to fully virtual, which creates, I think, also some challenges, and especially on important structures such as an annual general meeting, important moments such as a board meeting. I think that you cannot replace fully in-person meeting, and there is a temptation of seeing also reduction of rights if you're moving a lot of virtual. So I think that technology will definitely is already bringing and will bring more. I still have the feeling that on a lot of our questions and points, we are still at an early stage on stewardship of seeing really the benefits and the advantage of those technologies.
Thank you, Michael. Elisa, your comments on the advent of technology and whether stewardship practices might be changed?
Yeah, I completely agree on that. Technology is transforming the investment landscape, and that includes stewardship. So big data, AI, blockchain, there's still a lot of way to go, but there's already changes when it comes to gathering, analyzing information, making investment decisions, and also engaging. And we're hoping that they can help us, in our tracking of our engagement, for example, as well. These technologies can also lead to a more flattened investment chain. So again, you have the incorporation of beneficiary voices in investment decisions, which is a big area of focus especially when it comes to asset managers more than asset owners. And we're seeing, recent moves by some asset managers, especially in the US, to give some of their clients a choice when it comes to voting, although it's still limited to a choice of a general voting guideline as opposed to individual votes. So a lot is changing there. This, I think, can be helpful in democratizing aspects of the investment process, but I completely agree on this kind of important point that Michael made when it comes to the actual, institutional owners and institutional investors, stewardship and engagement. The proxy voting process per se still has so many issues, which again are less attention grabbing, but still deserving to be solved. And another, fully virtual meetings can be a challenge when it comes to shareholder engagement. And another issue that we see is a rise in dual class shares, which again is very dangerous when it comes to effective shareholder engagement. We already are a minority shareholder, and we're concerned by the rise in dual class shares across key jurisdictions that we're seeing recently, UK, EU, but also in Asia a few years ago, Singapore and Hong Kong moving in that direction.
Right, thank you very much. I think we have grilled our panelists with a range of very topical, very current, interesting questions on stewardship that we are interested in as researchers, as well as in the capacity of practitioners. Many of whom I know and have spoken to with regard to some of these challenges in relation to stewardship, in relation to integration of ESG and ESG practices, as well as looking forward to new and significant risks ahead. Even as we are nearing the close, yes, Francisco has a question, which is great. I would like to invite Francisco to ask the panelists what your question might be, and do my final nudge to members of the audience to send in any questions or comments if you have. Francisco, over to you.
Thank you so much for grabbing me a few extra minutes here, Iris. I'll be quick. No, I mean, I wanted to expand on some of the points you were mentioning, Iris. I think some of our academics colleagues out there are looking at, for instance, they're trying to find an explanation of why, if you look at, sustainable assets owned by asset managers like you, BNP Paribas and Norges, particularly in the US, the numbers have decreased year on year over the last 3-4 years. So some of our colleagues are looking at why. Is this as a result of less effective stewardship? Or why is the explanation of this? So I would like to ask you to briefly comment on this, if you could. Thank you. Michael, would you like to go first?
For sure, I was not sure who wants. Well, I think that maybe it's where there is fragmentation indeed, because it's hard going to be for me to comment on US for one reason, is that we don't have a big or almost non-US based clients. We are mostly European and Asia clients, so it's hard for me to comment on, I would say, the US based clients. What has been sure of is that I think that if you look at Europe on the other way around, what we've seen so far is overall, there might be quarters that are not true, but on the last three years, and especially since the SFDR the recommendation has been put in place in Europe, and the Article 8, Article 9 classification, Article 9 being, I would say, the top for those who don't know the SFDR classification on ESG integration, that we are clearly seeing over the last couple of years a better inflows from our Article 9 funds that was better than Article 8, that was better than Article 6, which is a lower grant. So clearly from a purely client perspective in Europe, that has been, and I think that, and that's part of the strategy for us also on that, is clearly seeing the market pushing to have more sustainable products. you have willingness from your clients, you have willingness from regulation to put in place. Again, I think that the US, in my perspective, has been more towards probably a semantic that needs to be different. If you mention ESG on some US asset owner, I mean, you just mention ESG. I mean, it's almost forbidden to mention ESG in your approach. Nevertheless, I mean, you need to speak and to adapt, I would say, the language and why you do it, and why it matters to do it.
Yeah, so it sounds like, you know, for instance, if we look at La BNP, you've been year on year increasing sustainable assets. So you've got a larger sustainable asset base today than you had 2-3 years ago, for sure. Yeah, that's
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And an attraction from our clients, especially. So I'm sorry, I'm a bit technical, but the regulation also has been there to ask clients their sustainable preference, and clearly, so having the belief that when you will be asking someone, does he want to have sustainable products from a European ground, the answer would be more yes than no. So from an asset manager perspective, you should be able to answer your client's need and be positioned toward that. And clearly, so now we have almost around 90% of our open assets that are either Article 8 or 9. So clearly being more both from having making sure our products are aligned and that are transformed to sustainability requests if we need to, and also a push towards having more and more inflow on those strategies.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Elisa, what are your thoughts on these? I mean, have you been increasing your sustainable asset base year on year as well, like BNP Paribas? Is that what you've done at Norges as well? And you know, more generally, I mean, if you look at those who haven't, you know, would you have an explanation for that? Thank you.
So I think this might be less relevant for us because we don't directly invest in what you might call ESG funds. So we don't have like a separate allocation to sustainable investments. But, you know, from a kind of more observer perspective, perhaps, I think the anti-ESG debate in the US is definitely playing a big role. And in Europe, the disclosure regulations and SFDR specifically, and the labeling of funds, well, labeling disclosure about, you know, Article 8, Article 9 has probably played a big role when it comes to this decrease in sustainable investments or ESG funds. And I think another issue is linked to the ESG rating. So we've engaged quite a bit on the issue this year when it comes to standard setting and regulatory engagement. And there's a lot of way to go when it comes to transparency of those. So again, there can be a lot of misunderstanding in terms of what these ESG ratings can measure when it comes, for example, to the approach to financial materiality, especially for retail investors. And we are really positive about the regulatory efforts to increase the transparency on issues such approach to materiality and methodology disclosures. Yeah, I think this is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, that's very useful. I mean, in terms of, you know, my take on these based on what I've spoken with people out there and several of the stakeholders. I mean, sometimes it's a bit like, you know, an explanation for these is like, okay, the concept of what a sustainable asset is has evolved. So some people say that's the reason why now we've got fewer investments because of that. And some other people suggest that, you know, some asset managers have been trying to avoid these greenwashing claims. And one way to do it is just to drop the level of the level of our sustainable asset base anyway. But this is very useful. Thank you so much. And back to you, Iris, to close the webinar. Thank you very much.
Right. We do actually have two questions that have come in from the audience, which I'll quickly address to our speakers. I think the first one that I want to address is rather interesting, is the scope of ESG issues that you might want to engage in. And this particular issue is whether or not an ESG issue should include not writing off older populations and supporting older people to remain and work for longer. I think our anonymous attendee possibly has a real interest in seeing this move up the social agenda. And I'm just wondering whether you think that should be included as an ESG issue for asset managers to champion in relation to their investee companies. Maybe
Yeah.
Alistair? Oh, sorry, Michael, would you like to say something?
I mean, Elisa, go ahead. I mean, up to you.
Sure, thank you. So I think, this is an issue that overall we tackle when it comes to, maybe not specifically, but we do look at fairness and equity in our expectations on social issues. And we do have one specifically, which is relatively recent. We published it in August last year on human capital and human capital management. So it's a topic which we engage closely with companies on, and we are, continuously pushing the boundaries when it comes to the range of topics. So, for example, this year we published a new expectation documents on consumer interests, which is a fairly new topic when it comes to stewardship practice. I guess less traditional than perhaps topics such as climate change or human rights.
Yeah,
Right,
maybe
Michael?
I cannot just quickly for sake of time. I mean, there have been, I think, a lot of discussion, for example, on just transition and making sure, indeed, I mean, especially on some sectors that are transitioning and potentially changing. I mean, if you consider auto car maker moving from to electrical vehicles, all the consequences that it has for their employees, which has a lot of consequences in terms of workforce, in terms of expertise, etc. So it's really very important question. I think that they are probably need to be addressed and focused more by investor, but they are still, I think, important element. If you again compare Climate Action 100, it is now an indicator. It was a beta indicator a year ago on just transition. It's now a full indicator. So it's part of the scope clearly of the engagement in question to make sure that the social dimension are taken into account. It's probably in fact a more we don't have time to discuss that. We could discuss an hour and a half on that, but it's probably even more challenging dimension because it's harder, I guess, from an indicator perspective, again from a communication perspective, from also to geographic issues that we're entering topics that are probably even more complex to apprehend and to explain than for example, climate.
Right, thank you very much. I think the final question, hopefully both of you might take a minute to quickly respond. This is someone's interest in how well stewardship is embedded in your organization, whether stewardship is like a silo department or whether it permeates throughout the enterprise of asset management. It affects deal making and investment allocation and decisions. How do you see your organization embedding stewardship across the entire asset management enterprise? Maybe 1 minute for either of you. Alyssa?
Sorry, happy to go first. No, absolutely not a silo. So we really integrate stewardship in everything we do. So our portfolio managers work really closely with the team that we have, specialists on governance topics who deals with the voting and, board level engagement. But the PMs are very directly involved when it comes to those dialogues, especially board level dialogues, but also dialogues at management level and the voting decisions. And they're also required to integrate ESG risk in their actual investment cases and investment processes. So very much integrated.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, the same in spirit, totally aligned. I think it's clearly the biggest challenge for the industry to make sure that the integration is there. I think, to be frank, I think that it's work in progress for a lot of our organization. Work in progress, why? Because it requires also a lot of education from investment team. I mean, so to be concretely giving an example quickly is that we have all our investment teams that had to make an external certification on sustainability to make sure that they have education. So I think that will be, I think that the biggest challenge to make sure that you have indeed the right integration at the full level of the organization. And for us, it's through different mechanisms, including training of those staff, and it's going to be work in progress. Of course, we are still having a centralizing team because that's I would say specialized subject, complex subject to have it. But in a way, I agree with Elisa's approach and explanation. I think that the challenge is that investment team and all the different persons that need to deal with that are going to be dealing with that. And it's not only in silo, and it's not only one unique team that deal with all those issues.
Right. Thank you, Michael. I think we have come to the end of our general Q&A, as well as the questions that Francisco and I really wanted to pose to you as practitioners and experts in the asset management industry. I'm sure everyone who has joined us has learned a lot about some of the inside workings and thinkings of large asset managers. And we hope to be able to carry on this conversation in relation to our continued interests. Right, so we have slightly overrun. I would like to thank our speakers, Elisa and Michael, for staying with us till the very end, and also all of our audience. Please do continue to keep a lookout for events from the UCL Center for Ethics and Law. And I wish you all a very good evening.